Why is this happening? What could possibly justify invading a sovereign, independent state like Ukraine? The only way to answer this is by looking at things from a Russian perspective. Because in spite of the raging fight on the ground, the war is not really about Ukraine. It is about Russia and its pursuit of geopolitics. It is about the Kremlin and its relationship with the White House. One of Russia's initial demands for de-escalation just before the war erupted was for NATO to roll back from Eastern Europe. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. In many ways, the Ukrainian conflict echoes the Soviet collapse. There is certainly an element of nation building, culture and history that draws Russia and Ukraine to each other, but from a geopolitical lens, the war is bigger than Ukraine. It is about Russia attempting to restore the multipolar global order that was lost. Like a gambling man who makes a living out of false hope, Russia believes that it must either be a world power or there will be no Russia. Today's video was sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is the first game to bring console-level experience to the phone. I've been playing Raid for a while now, and my two favorite champions are Raglan and Rotos. Raglan revives a single target, fills their turn meter, and gives them a bit of health. She's a true monster in arena, especially death battles. Rotos is one of the strongest and most desired single-target nukers in Raid. Invest in his HP along with his crit damage and crit rate, as he can deal loads of extra damage. This month is Raid's 3-year anniversary, but while we wait for the celebrations, check out Raid's first ever champion skins. They look pretty good. These skins let you alter a champion's appearance to something that suits your style and preference. I'm probably gonna go with this because it looks like Gandalf. Now, this is the best time to get started in Raid, and if you click my link in the description or scan my QR code here on the screen, you'll get a free starter pack worth almost $40. We're talking 3 free champions at once: Misericord, Tiger Soul, Romero, plus 10 Magic XP brews, 10 Force XP brews, 10 Spirit brews. That's huge. And this treasure will be waiting for you here, and it's that easy. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked a turning point in global geopolitics. No less than 14 Union republics broke away and proclaimed sovereignty and independence. The main body, however, the newly established Russian Federation, had lost centuries of geopolitical strife. Russia had been thrown back to its 18th century territorial boundaries. All the sacrifices the Russian Imperial Army and the Soviet Red Army made were nullified on December 25, 1991, when the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin and replaced with the flag of Russia. That was a hard pill to swallow, and an event that still haunts Russian foreign policy to this day. With the fall of the USSR came broken promises, plummeting healthcare, industrial decay, while kinship was replaced with hostility. And all those glorious technological marvels and infrastructure projects were left to rot. Tens of millions of lives were lost with nothing to show for it. The death of the Soviet Union was the end of communism as a global force, but it also marked the end of Russia as a superpower. For having retreated from its Soviet borders, from its outer shell, Russia itself was severely exposed to dangers emanating from the West. Part of the Russian rationale for invading Ukraine is the heartland theory. Drafted in 1904 by Halford Mackinder, the heartland theory divides the world in 3 bodies. The first body is the world island, which consists of Europe, Asia, and Africa. The second body refers to the offshore islands like the British Isles and the Japanese archipelago, while the third body points to the Americas and Australia as outlying islands. Within these parameters, there is special emphasis on the world island because it is the most populous and resource-rich landmass. Imagine if a superstate controlled policymaking from France to China to Saudi Arabia to South Africa. That power would have the technological prowess of Europe, the resources of Africa, and the workforce of Asia. Nothing would stand in its way. So whoever controls the world island would have the means to dominate the globe. However, within the world island, there is the heartland region, which extends from the Volga River to the Yangtze and from the Arctic to the Caspian Sea. This heartland region is the domain from which a single power could dominate the rest of the world island, provided that the power enjoys stability at home. Russia is the power that sits at the center of this theory, which is why it resonates with Russian foreign policy. But it gets even more zealous. Further dissecting the world island is Eastern Europe. Mackinder's theory argues that the home territory of the heartland power sits in Eastern Europe. So any power seeking global supremacy would emerge from the eastern half of the European continent. It's just about a nod to Russia. Now, Mackinder's theory initially served as a warning to the European powers, but instead became the manifest destiny of the Soviet Union. The heartland theory was so powerful that it shaped the course of the Cold War, and it continues to dominate Russian geopolitical thinking to this day. For instance, Alexander Dugin, who is one of the most influential Russian political speakers, has consistently argued for a Russian-based Eurasian power. And the Russian policymaking elite, known as the Siloviki, still adhere to the heartland theory. Admittedly, it seems strange to use a century-old geopolitical theory as a template in foreign policy. But one thing that keeps the heartland theory relevant is the constituency of geography. The Earth has domain over humankind, not vice versa. So having control over Eastern Europe would allow Russia to reclaim its global footing. Ukraine is just the first pit stop. But beyond pursuing a multipolar global order, there are also local nuances at play. Extending from St. Petersburg to Kazan to Volgograd is the Russian core. 80% of the Russian population lives in this area, and much of the decision-making by the Kremlin is based on the needs and interests of its core. However, the terrain itself is flat and part of the European plain. This open, green plain widens as it stretches eastward. By the time the European plain reaches the borders of the Russian Federation, its width eclipses 2,000 kilometers. No amount of weaponry can fully defend such a vast, flat landscape. Seen in this way, the loss of the Soviet boundaries cost the Russians dearly, both politically and economically. Russia is forced to maintain a massive border with some of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. It has been a costly status quo. Accordingly, to reduce military spending, Russia needs to reduce its exposure along the European plain. To do that, however, Russian policymakers argue that the Russian state needs to anchor by the Baltic Sea and the Carpathian Mountains. Sitting along the northern rim of the European plain, the Baltic region is an interesting case. Individually, the Baltic nations lack the strength to threaten Russia, but the region as a whole acts as a conduit for great powers to exert pressure on the Russian core. From the Swedish incursion in the 18th century to the German invasions in the 20th century, plenty of European powers have tried subduing Russia by going through the Baltics. Today, however, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania are part of NATO, which places them beyond the reach of Russian subjugation. Be that as it may, geopolitics dictates that Russia take over the Baltics should the opportunity ever present itself. Doing so would allow the Russians to connect the Kaliningrad region to the Russian mainland without tiptoeing through or around NATO territory. Control of the Baltics would also strengthen Russia's presence and hold over the Baltic Sea at large. Meanwhile, the Carpathians present an auspicious foothold for the Russians, a buffer against marching armies. The arc that is, the Carpathian range is not impenetrable, but it does offer strategic depth to the occupying force in an otherwise flat space. If the European plain represents a highway for invading armies, the Carpathians is a speed bump in the middle of that highway. That strategic depth is priceless, and that consideration is the ultimate rationale for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, it also means that the Russian objective in Ukraine is to take the entire country. So, as much as the rhetoric focuses on Donbass, Kharkiv, Kiev and Odessa, it misses the larger point. From the Russian angle, they need to push up to the Carpathian Mountains. So, Russia needs all of Ukraine, but also all of Moldova. When Lukashenko spoke with the members of the Belarusian Security Council, the map he used had an arrow going into the Moldovan separatist region of Transnistria. So, had Russia's military invasion of Ukraine gone more successfully, Moldova would have seen fighting as well. By and large, with the invasion of Ukraine, Russia sought to anchor by the Carpathians. By taking over all of Ukraine and eventually Moldova, Russia would have restored a portion of the Soviet boundaries, enough to reduce its exposed flank by the European plain to 600 kilometers, which is a substantial drop from the current 2,000 kilometers. Ideally, the Russians would want to push west as much as they can, preferably taking over all of Poland and the Baltics, but one step at a time. Ukraine is in a fight for its existence, and if Russia wins, the Baltics and Poland are next. Count on it. Likewise, if Russia loses the war in Ukraine, or it can't have all of it today, it will try again tomorrow. No treaty or ceasefire will last. Think of the European plain as a game of chess, where each player seeks to maximize the position of its pawns by strategically placing them. The further NATO pushes east into the European plain towards the Russian Federation, the more flexible its strategic planning becomes and the more room for mistakes it gains. A NATO-allied Ukraine would likely see cruise missile launchers on its soil, where flight time to the Russian core would be around 3 minutes. A build-up like that would force the Russians to spend even more on the military by establishing new bases deep in Russian territory. For instance, east of the border of Ukraine, the flat terrain of the European plain continues uninterrupted for 750 kilometers to the shoreline of the Caspian Sea. This line, known as the Volgograd Gap, is fundamental to the existence of the Russian state. Should a hostile force close this gap, it would disconnect Russia from the Caucasus, the Black Sea, and the Caspian Sea. A NATO-allied Ukraine would certainly look to exploit that vulnerability. It wouldn't happen overnight, the build-up would be a steady process taking decades, but it would happen nevertheless. Having said that, the reverse is true as well. The more Russia pushes westward, the more secure the Russian core gets, the more room for error it gains, and the fewer options NATO has. So a Russian-controlled Ukraine would see the militarization of Poland, Romania, and the Baltic nations, even more so than at present. From the Russian point of view, that would balance the scale of things. All things considered, Ukraine is only one piece in Russia's geopolitical design. It's still a large piece, but one piece nonetheless. By taking over Ukraine and then Moldova, Russia believes it could lift itself as a premier global power while also securing its core demographic space. Going by this, for Russia it's either expand or die. Russian policymakers, particularly the Siloviki, believe that political legitimacy comes from military conquest. They believe that peace is a lie, just another means of decay, like death by 1,000 cuts. I've been your host Shirvan from CaspianReport. If you approve of our content and you want to show some support, please consider joining our Patreon platform or the YouTube membership program. By joining either, we gain the means to do more content. In any case, thank you for watching, and Saul.